Hello, Euro nerds, and welcome to the first portion of this multi-part series on the Age of Exploration and Colonialism. These series of Edpuzzles will guide you through this topic of history. There's a lot of moving parts. It covers a lot of a timeline, but luckily, I do find it to be some of the more straightforward content in AP Euro, hence why I'm assigning it as an Edpuzzle. And additionally, you have some background in this stuff from Global 9 last year. So please turn to the appropriate page in your note packet, follow along, add in annotations like you normally do in class, and let's get going. So this first portion here, I'm going to largely cover the causes of exploration and eventually colonization of the quote-unquote New World. And honestly, that's often the most important part, is knowing the causes of events in our course, and this is, of course, no exception. So here we go. Alright, as always, our exam themes, we don't need to know them, but they're kind of cool just to look at. Overall here, we're going to see a lot of states and institutions of power and technology as well. And of course, since we're talking about Europe and the rest of the world, here you go, interaction of Europe and the world. Alright, as always, our essential questions. For this section in particular, we're really going to focus on the motivations, the causes of exploration and colonialism. So political reasons, economic reasons, social reasons, as well as we're going to look at some of the earlier technology that allowed Europe to be so dominating in this control of the world. Alright, so these I'm going to trust that you'll read on your own. This is going to be a nice little overview of the impact of European colonialism. So you can pause this, give it a read, and let's keep going. All right. So, contextualizing why Europe is going to start exploring and eventually colonizing other continents of the world. And of course, we got to go all the way back to the Crusades. I mentioned this briefly in class. The Crusades is really starting this interest of Europeans with the spice trade, the luxury trades. And because they have contact with the Middle East and therefore the Far East, as the Europeans would call it, but we know that means basically China, as well as South Asia, like India, Southeast Asia, like Thailand, Cambodia area, Vietnam, well, modern day, I should say. And that's going to promote the need, or really I should say the want for these luxury items, because folks, who wants to cook a chicken with no pepper on it, right? Yeah, exactly. All right, so a lot of that trade is initially dominated by the Italians. We know why. They're right in the middle of the Mediterranean, especially the Florentines, the Venetians, and the Genovese. All right, so for us, we're going to see at the beginning of colonization, it's going to largely be led by the Portuguese and the Spaniards, but pretty quickly, the English, French, and the Dutch are going to surpass both the Portuguese and the Spanish in control over this international trade as well as colonization. Okay, more context. So we can't talk about any of this without 1453. I think 1453 is important. It's just the beginning of our course. Our course officially begins in 1450, by the way. And the Byzantine Empire collapses. It was overthrown by the Ottoman Turks. They take over Constantinople, they rename it Istanbul, and this is really important. Historically, Constantinople was like the center of trade in between Europe and Asia. And since when it was Constantinople, it was controlled by Christians. And now, the Ottoman Turks, they are Muslims. So now what's going to happen is the Turks are going to jack up the prices of these luxury goods coming from Asia, peppercorns, silks, whatever you want from basically the Silk Roads, and now Europeans are going to have to find a new way to bypass the Turks and their high prices and find another way to access these luxury items. So overall, please keep the Ottomans in the back of your mind for the early portion of this course. The Ottoman Empire, they are at their height in the 15th and 16th centuries, and they are a massive empire. They control a good portion of southern Europe. Like, for example, they controlled modern-day Bosnia, Croatia, what eventually would become Yugoslavia. They control the entirety of what we would call the region of Palestine, which would be like modern-day Israel. They control a good portion of North Africa. So they are an empire to contend with, and they will exist all the way until the middle of World War I, where their empire will eventually collapse. So keep the Ottomans in the back of your mind. All right. So another reason why Europe is going to start colonizing is they have the technology to do so. So yeah, we've always had ships, we know that, blah, blah, but the key part is if they're exploring previously unexplored oceans and seas, they need to be able to do that without dying, getting lost and dying, I probably should say. So we have a few inventions, and I'll briefly cover them in the other parts of this presentation. But basically, if you have an idea that you have advanced technology, allows people to navigate successfully and also conquer other people, you're probably pretty good. The astrolabe, the sextant, they're going to allow better navigation. The caravel is going to be more efficient means of travel with a new type of sail. The Dutch Vloot, which is basically a better transport ship that they create. Advances in cartography, which is map making. And of course, the European perfection of gunpowder, turning it into weapons like muskets, eventually call them rifles, cannons, and that allows them to conquer groups of people that are not using gunpowder, and in some cases not even using steel weapons. All right, now we get to the causes. So these are going to be, again, split up in political, social, economic. We know them. All right, here we go. Political causes. Whew. Number 1. Often, these new monarchs are going to fund these expeditions, and the question is why? Why would Ferdinand and Isabella of Aragon and Castile support Christopher Columbus? So, reason number 1, this could potentially allow these new monarchs to reduce the power of the nobility. That's always been their problem, is the issue with the nobles. So if they're going to explore new land, potentially gain new riches, that allows them to maybe have more money for their country and perhaps bypass the nobility, who may or may not control their respective parliaments or whatever their version of parliament is. So it could be a way of bypassing the nobility. Importance number 1. Economic. This could have a few versions. 1, they obviously can extract the natural resources like gold, like eventually more, products like potatoes, etc. And it could lead to the establishment of profit-making colonies, so they can continue that extraction of resources over a long period of time. Again, money matters. Social. So here, we're talking basically about religion. So, especially in the process of the Protestant Reformation, where Europe is now kind of being divided between Catholics and now Protestants. Well, if you have we're talking now about millions of people who are following polytheistic religions, which Europeans had absolutely no respect for, that's now talking about millions of people that could be converted to, at least if it's the Spanish or the Portuguese, Catholicism. But if we're now talking about the English, it can also mean Protestantism as well. So the social part is largely based on religion. Overall, if you want to really generalize the motivations for colonization, we're talking God, glory, gold. The glory part is more nationalistic, meant to empower the monarchs, empower their countries. God, glory, gold. Okay, the economic motivations, and I already mentioned a few of these. The luxury items. Europeans want access to luxury items that have now been too expensive because of the Ottoman control over Istanbul and that trade over the Silk Road. Of course, our spices, and I give you a whole long list of spices as well as other foodstuffs. Beverages as well. So, try to be more specific. If you're writing about this, don't just say they wanted spices. Talk about peppercorn. Talk about cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, things that are so important with our when we make a lot of confectionery goods. Sugar. Oh man, you gotta star sugar. You gotta know sugar. Can you imagine your life without sugar? No, you can't. Sugar is going to be the most profitable of all of these cash crops because, folks, people want their food to taste sweet. It's addicting. Additionally, in China, in Korea, in Vietnam, they grow a plethora, as well as India, they grow a plethora of tea. And we know one country in Europe is really going to get an obsession with tea. Yes, indeed. England, eventually we'll call it Britain, by 1707. One of the on the same lines, we have coffee beans. Coffee was actually originally cultivated in Ethiopia, but we're going to find is that Latin America, which is basically like South America, Central America, and the Caribbean, have a fantastic climate to grow coffee, and Europeans will also have an obsession with coffee. Coffee and coffee houses were kind of like the fuel to the Enlightenment. People would go to these coffee houses in the 1700s and talk about politics. So these foodstuffs have an understanding of, especially sugarcane, gotta know it, as a major economic cause of colonization. All right, we got some other things. So we have cocoa or cacao. These, yes, are cacao beans, and yes, they kind of are gross on the inside, but that's how you get cocoa. Tobacco, another luxury item. They are going to figure out that they enjoy smoking and not really understand the long-term impact on lungs on that one, but regardless, they're going to like smoking. Potatoes! Put a star on potatoes. You gotta know your potatoes. Potatoes are originally cultivated in Peru, and then will quickly be transported to Europe. And really, by about the 1700s, the potato has infiltrated the diets of the lower classes of Europe, especially in Ireland, especially in Eastern Europe. The potato is like this miracle crop. It is extremely easy to grow, grows in most types of crappy soil, and it's packed full of nutrients. You can live off potatoes. It ain't fun, but you can. So besides food, we have, of course, gold and silver. Obviously, God, glory, gold. And we know gold and silver are very valuable. There's a ton of it in South America. Africa has some as well. And basically, Europeans want to get rich, and that's a pretty quick way of doing it. Acquiring, really stealing, gold and silver. All right, more social motivations. So this is going to mostly be focused on religion, as well as the belief of really cultural supremacy that Europeans are going to have, unfortunately. So, all right, if we're talking about, again, Portugal and Spain, their goal is to spread Catholicism. On these boats, on the boats of Pizarro, on boats of Cortez, when they're taking over South America, there will be missionaries. And in some cases, missionaries will be on different boats, and it won't be necessarily violent, but missionary work is absolutely critical to spreading Catholicism, especially in the context of the Protestant Reformation, tearing Europe apart along religious lines. So eventually, the papacy, the Pope, of course, is going to create a new order of priests called the Society of Jesus, or better known as the Jesuits, and their goal is to be missionaries. Their goal is to spread Catholicism to the quote-unquote New World. North America, South America, India as well, Japan as well. Eventually they get kicked out of Japan. But their goal, spread Catholicism. So France, large, is about a 90% Catholic country. By the 1600s, 17th century, it's about split, about 90%, not split, I should say 90% Catholic, about 10% Protestant, once we're that far into French history. And of course, Protestant England is going to be dominated by the Anglicans, but what happens is some groups of Protestants, or minority groups of Protestants in England, will leave England, like the Puritans, for example, will eventually migrate to North America and establish colonies. And for example, like the northeast of the eventual United States was pretty much founded by Puritans, with some exceptions, of course. Okay, more social. So this kind of gets into the belief in European cultural supremacy. Last year, I think in Global 90, you probably covered the term ethnocentrism. It's the belief that your culture is superior to someone else. And I think last year you probably talked about it in the context of the Chinese dynasties, and how they believed China was the quote-unquote middle kingdom, whatever. So in this case, Europe believes their religion, their languages, their food is superior to the people they are now conquering in North and South America, South Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia. So when we look at the long-term impact of colonization, look at all these areas of the world that now speak European languages. If you go to South America, what's the majority language of most South Americans? It's going to be Spanish, unless, of course, it's Brazil, which will be Portuguese. Because why is it Portuguese? Because the Portuguese colonized modern-day Brazil. So looking at the spread of these languages throughout the New World is another, not only motive of colonization, but, of course, effect as well. Okay. So I mentioned this a lot already, but again, I really think of the social motivations in the context of ethnocentrism, and that idea is going to really dominate the European mindset for hundreds of years to come. It's the root of racism for Europeans and how they viewed the people they are colonizing. So this is really where it starts. All right. So we'll cover some of these technological developments, and then we will end part 1 here. All right. So number 1, the astrolabe. So basically, the astrolabe allows navigators to figure out their relation to the stars, and therefore it kind of gives them an idea of where they are latitude-wise on the Earth. So when they're in the open ocean and have absolutely no landmarks, and at night they can look at the stars, that gives them an idea of where they are in the ocean, and that's really important for not getting lost, so nice job, astrolabe. Okay, so you can read about it here if you would like, and we're going to keep going. Okay, the sextant. So this device has some similarities to the astrolabe, but basically what's key with this one is you can use it in both dark and daylight. So again, it helps with navigation, helps with charting your course, but it can be used all the time and not just at night. So has a little bit more use than perhaps the astrolabe. Keep on going. There's a little diagram of how it works. Oh, it's a little GIF. Oh, it's a GIF. Yeah, look at this. Oh yeah, crazy. I still don't really know how it works because my brain doesn't operate this way. I just know the effect of it. Whoa, read the angle. All right, we're gonna keep going. All right, next one we got the caravel. So the caravel is originally a Portuguese invention. It's going to be modified by a bunch of different countries, but effectively it is going to use this new type of sail. So circle the Latin or the triangular sail, and that's going to allow Europeans to be able to use the wind patterns more efficiently. So I am not a sailor by any means, but essentially they can use both like front winds, crosswinds, I forget the exact terms for them. They don't have to worry too much about the wind patterns. The triangular sail allows them to use really any wind pattern to go in the direction they want to. Additionally, these caravels are going to really be focused on cargo more than, like, let's say, massive cannons and to destroy everything. There will be cannons on a lot of them, but it's really about cargo, which shows what's a major motivation of exploration. It is all about the money. They want the resources. Okay. Alright, so more information about the caravels. You can read it on your own. We understand it. Alright, moving on. The Dutch flute. I am probably pronouncing that horrifically because Dutch is a difficult language to pronounce. So, these are going to be different than like the massive galleons that the Spanish used, which were really meant to overwhelm the enemy with the number of cannons and soldiers on them. The Dutch are going to be really focused on the trade portion, the economic, the wealth extraction when it comes to colonization, more than just conquering massive parts of land and being extremely violent. The Dutch absolutely have examples of treating natives horrifically, looking at Indonesia, for example, but compared to Spain and Portugal, not as much. And their development of a new type of ship, the flute, is this example of that, where they're getting rid of all of the cannons and focusing on cargo space. So, again, an element of motivation for colonization. It is economic and wealth extraction. So one more thing I probably should note, put a little star on the impact here. So this kind of gets into the mid-17th century, where the Dutch are going to be one of the wealthiest countries on earth. They have their own golden age in about 1650s to the late 1600s. And the reason is because they had this ship that allowed them to really focus on wealth extraction. So, moving on. There's the flute. I just like trying to pronounce it very wrong. And yes, that is the Dutch flag. And no, there is no orange on it. Alright, I don't want to watch a boring video. Alright, cartography, the art of making maps. Really cool profession. Not really sure how much money is involved in it anymore, but I just think it's a really cool profession. I love maps. So, map making matters in, of course, the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. You want to have accurate maps. So, A famous one is, of course, the Mercator projection. Mercator was a Flemish cartographer, and he makes the most famous map of the world that is still, even in 2023, used the most. It is pretty darn accurate, especially for being a 16th century invention. However, there are a lot of problems with it. The issue with making a map of the Earth is that you're trying to put a spherical 3D object onto a two-dimensional plane, and naturally you need to make quote-unquote corrections. And the Mercator projection, if there's a landmass near the poles, so North and South Pole, they are presented as physically larger than any landmass that's closer to the equator. And therefore, like, Greenland looks massive, South America looks massive, and then you have Africa, which is dramatically bigger than both of those, looks much smaller. So if you do see a Mercator projection and Africa looks particularly small, just know that that is not correct, but it had to be done because that's the reality of map making. Alright, skippity skip. Alright, weaponry, star, gunpowder, gotta know it. So in addition to gunpowder, like, just simply having access to steel weapons is also going to be really important, especially when we're talking about the colonization of North and South America. All the native civilizations, they did not use metal for their weapons. They used some type of obsidian rock that they broke apart, and that's what they attached to their spears. In many cases, just flat out rocks. But compared to steel, that there's no competition there. Then you add in muskets that use gunpowder that can shoot right through armor. It's a one-sided battle. So this gets in the history of, obviously, gunpowder, going back to the Chinese, but it really is the European perfection of these weapons that allow them to colonize so many different groups of people in North and South America. Alrighty. Folks, that is part 1 for us. Thanks for listening. Causes matter. Listen for the next part. See you later.